Hi, welcome to Midpointe, a place where we can share some encouragement from last Sunday's sermon at Crosspoint Church. As always, if you missed the sermon, it is on our YouTube page, and the link to that is in the description of this video. This Sunday, we focused on what two disciples did right after Jesus was arrested. Pastor Garrett covered the verses from chapter 26, verse 69 to chapter 27, verse 10 in the book of Matthew. But for the sake of this video, we're just going to go over the verses that have to do with those two disciples, Peter and Judas.
Matthew chapter 26, verse 69. Now Peter was sitting outside in the courtyard, and a servant girl came up to him and said, "You also were with Jesus the Galilean." But he denied it before them all, saying, "I do not know what you mean." And when he went out to the entrance, another servant girl saw him and said to the bystanders, "This man was with Jesus of Nazareth." And again he denied it with an oath, "I do not know the man." After a little while, the bystanders came up and said to Peter, "Certainly you too are one of them, for your accent betrays you." And then he began to evoke a curse on himself and swear, "I do not know the man." Immediately the rooster crowed. Peter remembered the sayings of Jesus, "Before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. And he went out and wept bitterly. Then, when Judas his betrayer saw that Jesus was condemned, he changed his mind and brought back the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and the elders, saying, "I have sinned by betraying innocent blood." They said, "What is this to us? See it to yourself." Throwing down the 30 pieces of silver into the temple, he departed and went and hanged himself.
I never thought about comparing Peter and Judas together. So I came up with lists of different things that they did after Jesus was arrested. And I have to say, the things that Judas did, I started to kind of agree with the choices that he made. They seemed like the right things to do. But of course, we know it didn't turn out well for him, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's look at the lists of things that both of these men did. Starting with Peter, his list is short. After he denied Jesus 3 times, he went away and then he wept bitterly. And we can add on there, which Pastor Garrett did, he felt guilt. It's obvious no one would go and weep bitterly about something if they weren't feeling remorse, if they weren't feeling guilt. So that's all we know. That's all we know about Peter until after Jesus is raised from the dead. Let's see now what Judas did after he betrayed Jesus, after he turned Jesus over to the religious leaders. He went to the temple. He acknowledged his sin. He confessed to lying about Jesus. He acknowledged that Jesus was innocent. He tried to make things right. He returned the silver, and then he left the temple. And it seems like we can add on there also, he felt guilt. If I didn't know who either of these people were, if I didn't know the situation, the context, I would look at Judas and think, good job. Those are the steps to making things right. Confessing that you did wrong, returning the silver, telling them, hey, I was wrong, I made a mistake, you gotta release the guy. That seems right. So why didn't it work out for him? Well, let's see what happens next. Now it's Judas who has the short list. He hung himself. All right, well, that's the end for him. Nothing came of him trying to make things right. He just went out and hung himself. Let's see what Peter did. Peter went back to be with the other disciples. When the women who first went to Jesus' tomb came back and told all the disciples, hey, Jesus is alive, he's risen from the dead, Peter was there. So he was with his friends there, with the other disciples. And he ran to the tomb. He ran to go find Jesus. He also swam to Jesus with excitement. When he was on a boat fishing and he saw Jesus on the shore, he jumped out of the boat, swam over there. He was excited to see Jesus. He was restored by Jesus. and then used by God to minister to the Jews, to be his apostle. So why did Judas fail and Peter succeed? Simple answer. Peter drew near to Jesus. Judas did not. Judas took things into his own hands and tried to settle things with people. Peter simply went to Jesus. I was reading in 2 Corinthians the other day, and I found a verse that sums all this up really well. It's 2 Corinthians 7:10. For godly grief produces a repentance that leads to salvation without regret, whereas worldly grief produces death. Wow, there it is. When we sin, we so often try to make things right by doing more things to make up for what we did. Now, some things are good to do. Like if you broke something, you should pay for it. If you hurt someone, you should apologize. But if we miss the whole repenting before God, then all that stuff is worthless. Both men felt guilt. Sin brings guilt. One tried to fix it on his own, and one simply went to God. What will you do? Well, those are my thoughts for this week's Midpoint. Nothing really new. It was sort of a recap of the message. But sometimes it's good to take a bit of time, come back to what we learned so that it will sink in more. Let me know what you found encouraging from this message or from past messages. And please join us this Sunday so you can hear more about what's going on in the book of Matthew, and so that we can then encourage each other with all the things that God is giving us in his word, helping us to understand. I encourage you to join us this Sunday at 10:30 a.m. for our main service. We also have a Sunday school at 9:15 a.m. that you're very welcome to join. Until next time, God bless.